The morning fog hung thick over Fort Richardson as Private Maria Santos stepped off the transport truck, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination etched across her weathered face. At 28, she was older than most recruits, carrying the weight of a difficult past that had led her to this moment. The other soldiers barely glanced her way as she made her way toward the processing center, their dismissive attitudes already forming the foundation of what would become a pattern of neglect and underestimation. Maria's journey to this military base hadn't been conventional. Born in a small border town in Texas, she had grown up in a household where her father worked double shifts at the local factory while her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families on the other side of town. Education had been a luxury they couldn't afford, and by the age of 16, Maria was working alongside her parents, contributing every dollar to keep their family afloat. The military represented her only path forward, a chance to build something better for herself and send money back to her aging parents. The processing officer, a bored-looking corporal named Jenkins, barely looked up from his paperwork as Maria approached his desk. His eyes swept over her briefly, taking in her small frame, her accented English, and the cheap civilian clothes she wore. Without bothering to hide his skepticism, he handed her a stack of forms and pointed toward a row of metal chairs against the wall. "Fill these out completely. No mistakes. You'll be assigned to Barracks C, Bunk 14. Report to Sergeant Mitchell at 0600 tomorrow for orientation," Jenkins said, his tone suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. "Try to keep up with the real soldiers." Maria accepted the papers without comment, though something in her eyes flickered at his casual dismissal. She had heard similar comments her entire life, from teachers who assumed she wouldn't amount to much, from employers who saw her as expendable labor, from people who judge her based on her appearance and background before giving her a chance to prove herself. Each slight had only strengthened her resolve. Barracks C turned out to be the oldest building on the base, with peeling paint on the walls and windows that didn't quite seal properly against the cold mountain air. The other soldiers occupying the space were a mix of troublemakers, underperformers, and those the military hadn't quite figured out what to do with. As Maria entered with her gear, conversation stopped and 20 pairs of eyes assessed her with varying degrees of indifference and hostility. "Great, another charity case," muttered Private Rodriguez from his position near the window, as if this place wasn't crowded enough already. Private Johnson, a tall woman with short-cropped blonde hair, looked up from the book she was reading. "Don't mind Rodriguez. He's bitter about everything. I'm Johnson. That's your bunk over there." She pointed to a narrow bed with a thin mattress and a small metal locker beside it. Maria nodded her thanks and began unpacking her few possessions. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and she intended to let her performance do the talking. The other soldiers gradually returned to their own activities, though she could feel their continued scrutiny as she organized her space with military precision despite having no formal training yet. That evening in the mess hall, Maria sat alone at a corner table, eating the institutional food and observing the social dynamics around her. Groups had clearly already formed, with the more popular soldiers claiming the central tables while others like herself occupied the periphery. She noticed how certain soldiers received extra portions or preferred assignments, while others seemed to be systematically overlooked or assigned the worst duties. The next morning arrived with the harsh sound of reveille echoing through the barracks. Maria was already awake, having spent years rising before dawn for work, and she was dressed and ready before most of her bunkmates had even opened their eyes. This early preparation would become one of her defining characteristics, though few would notice or appreciate it in those first weeks. Sergeant Mitchell stood before the assembled recruits like a mountain of muscle and authority. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing commanding, and his voice carried the weight of 20 years of military service. As his eyes swept over the group, they lingered dismissively on Maria, taking in her small stature and obvious nervousness. "Listen up, recruits. Some of you might actually become soldiers. Others will wash out and go back to whatever dead-end lives you came from. The military doesn't have time to babysit those who can't handle the pressure. His gaze fixed directly on Maria as he spoke these words. Physical training begins in 10 minutes. Try not to embarrass yourselves too badly. The physical training session proved to be Maria's first real test. While she lacked the natural athleticism of some recruits, her years of manual labor had given her a wiry strength and endurance that served her well. She struggled with some exercises, but completed every single one, often while other recruits gave up or made excuses. Sergeant Mitchell noticed, but chose to focus his attention on praising the natural athletes while ignoring Maria's persistent effort. During weapons training, Maria's careful attention to detail and steady hands made her a surprisingly good marksman. She listened intently to every instruction, practiced relentlessly during free time, and gradually improved her scores. Yet when assignments for advanced training were posted, her name was consistently absent despite her demonstrated competence. The pattern continued through her first month. Kitchen duty fell disproportionately to Maria, and the other soldiers deemed less valuable. The most desirable assignments went to those who had already gained favor with the sergeants and officers. When equipment was distributed, Maria often received gear that was worn or damaged, while others got first pick of the new supplies. Private Johnson proved to be Maria's only real ally during those early weeks. During a rare evening of free time, she approached Maria with a cup of coffee and sat down beside her on the steps outside the barracks. "You know they're testing you, right?" Johnson said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Mitchell and the others. They want to see if you'll break or complain or cause trouble." Maria looked at her with interest. "What makes you think that?" "Because they did the same thing to me when I first got here. Different reasons, but same treatment. I'm from rural Alabama, daughter of a preacher. They figured I was too soft for military life." Johnson smiled grimly. "Took me 6 months to prove them wrong." "How'd you do it?" "By being better than everyone else at everything they threw at me. No shortcuts, no complaints, just consistent excellence until they couldn't ignore me anymore." Johnson stood up and stretched. "The difference is I could blend in eventually. You've got additional challenges they'll use against you if you let them." Maria understood what Johnson meant without needing it spelled out. Her ethnicity, her background, her gender, her size, all factors that some would use to justify their low expectations. But she had faced similar challenges her entire life, and had learned that the best response was simply to outwork everyone around her. The turning point began during a routine training exercise in the 3rd week. The recruits were tasked with a 20-mile march carrying full packs through mountainous terrain. Several soldiers had already fallen out with injuries or exhaustion when Sergeant Mitchell noticed that Maria was not only keeping pace, but was actually supporting one of the struggling recruits, sharing the weight of his pack while maintaining her own. "Santos," Mitchell barked, approaching her position in the formation. "What do you think you're doing?" "Helping my fellow soldier complete the mission, Sergeant," Maria replied without breaking stride. "Nobody asked you to be a hero. That soldier's weakness is his own problem." Maria continued marching, but her response was clear and measured. "With respect, Sergeant, we were taught that we leave no one behind." I interpreted that to include training exercises. Mitchell fell silent, but Maria caught something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even respect. The march continued, and Maria maintained her support of the struggling soldier until they all crossed the finish line together. That evening, word of Maria's actions spread through the barracks. Some soldiers dismissed it as showing off, but others began to look at her differently. When the next challenging assignment was posted, Maria's name appeared on the list for the first time. The assignment turned out to be a combat simulation exercise that would pit teams of soldiers against each other in complex scenarios. Maria found herself assigned to a team led by Corporal Davis, a career soldier known for his tactical expertise and high standards. Davis looked over his team with obvious disappointment when he saw Maria's assignment. "Great. They stick me with the charity case. He muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Try to stay out of the way and don't get us all killed." The exercise took place in a mock urban environment constructed on the base, complete with buildings, vehicles, and realistic combat scenarios. Maria's team was tasked with defending a strategic position against a larger attacking force. During the planning session, Davis ignored Maria's suggestions and assigned her to what he considered the least important position. "You'll be stationed in the supply building. Just watch for movement and try not to shoot any of our own people by mistake," Davis said dismissively. "Leave the real fighting to those of us who know what we're doing." Maria accepted her assignment without argument, but she used her time to study the tactical maps and observe the patterns of previous exercises. She noticed that successful attacking forces often used the supposedly secure supply route as an infiltration path, something that had been overlooked in most defensive plans. When the exercise began, Maria positioned herself with clear sight lines to both the supply building and the approach routes that others had dismissed as unlikely attack vectors. For the first hour, the battle developed exactly as Davis had predicted, with the main assault focusing on the primary defensive positions. Then, Maria spotted movement in the shadows of the supply route. 3 members of the attacking force attempting to flank the main defensive line. Rather than simply reporting the contact, she moved to intercept them, using the terrain and abandoned equipment for cover. The ensuing firefight lasted only minutes, but it effectively eliminated the attacking force's surprise advantage and saved Davis's defensive position from being overrun. When the exercise ended and the results were analyzed, it became clear that Maria's initiative had been the decisive factor in her team's victory. Davis approached her afterward, his expression a mixture of surprise and grudging respect. "Where did you learn to read terrain like that?" "I grew up hunting in the mountains with my grandfather," Maria replied simply. "He taught me that the obvious path is usually the wrong path." "Well, you might actually have some potential after all," Davis said, though he still seemed reluctant to admit it fully. Word of Maria's performance began to spread beyond her immediate unit. Other soldiers started paying attention to her during training exercises, and some of the informal barriers that had kept her isolated began to break down. She was invited to join study groups for the first time, and her suggestions during tactical discussions were no longer automatically dismissed. However, this newfound recognition also brought new challenges. Some soldiers who had previously ignored her now saw her as a threat to their own positions. Private Matthews, a soldier who had always considered himself one of the top performers in their group, became particularly hostile. "Don't think one lucky break makes you special," he told her after a particularly successful training session. "We all know you're just trying to prove you belong here when everyone can see you don't." Maria's response was measured but firm. "I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone except myself. If that threatens you, maybe you should focus more on your own performance." The confrontation might have escalated, but Sergeant Mitchell chose that moment to address the entire group. His announcement would change everything for Maria and set in motion the events that would ultimately define her military career. "Listen up, people. Command has announced a new program for advanced training opportunities. They're looking for soldiers who demonstrate exceptional potential for leadership and specialized operations." Mitchell's eyes swept over the assembled recruits. "The selection process will be rigorous, and most of you won't qualify. But for those who do, it represents a fast track to positions of real responsibility in the military." As Mitchell outlined the requirements and selection criteria, Maria felt something stir inside her that had been dormant since her arrival at the base. This was the opportunity she had been working toward, the chance to prove that she belonged not just in the military, but in its most challenging and respected positions. The application deadline was 1 week away, and the competition would be fierce. Every top performer in the unit would be applying, along with soldiers from other bases who had already distinguished themselves. Maria knew that her recent successes had earned her consideration, but she also understood that she would be fighting against both the expectations of others and her own self-doubt. That night, she sat at her small desk in the barracks, carefully filling out the application forms. Around her, other soldiers were doing the same, but their conversations revealed a confidence that Maria couldn't quite share. They spoke of their achievements, their connections, their certainty that they deserved to be selected. Johnson approached her desk as she was finishing the paperwork. "You're applying?" "Yes," Maria said simply. "Good. You've earned the right to compete with anyone here." Johnson paused, then added quietly, "Just remember that some people will never accept that you belong, no matter what you accomplish. Don't let that stop you from trying." Maria nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind Johnson's words. Tomorrow she would submit her application and begin preparing for the most important test of her military career. She had come too far and overcome too much to let anyone else's expectations limit her potential. As she sealed her application in its envelope, Maria reflected on how much had changed since that first dismissive encounter with Corporal Jenkins. She was no longer the uncertain recruit who had arrived with nothing but determination and a desire to build a better life. She had proven herself capable of meeting every challenge thrown at her, and she was ready for whatever came next. The other soldiers gradually settled into their bunks for the night, but Maria remained awake, staring out the window at the dark mountains beyond the base. Somewhere out there lay her future, and she was determined to seize it regardless of who tried to stand in her way. The girl they had discarded without a thought was about to show them exactly what they had underestimated. The selection process for the advanced training program began with a series of written examinations that tested everything from military history to tactical analysis. Maria arrived at the testing center 2 hours early, using the extra time to review her notes one final time. She watched as other candidates filtered in, many of them displaying the easy confidence that came from years of praise and recognition. Captain Williams, the officer overseeing the selection process, was a decorated veteran with a reputation for fairness, but also for maintaining impossibly high standards. As he addressed the assembled candidates, his tone made it clear that he considered most of them unworthy of the opportunity they were pursuing. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're attempting today is not simply another training exercise. This program exists to identify and develop the military leaders of tomorrow. The vast majority of you will fail, not because you lack ability, but because you lack the particular combination of intelligence, character, and determination that true leadership requires." Maria felt the familiar flutter of nerves that always preceded a major challenge. But underneath, it was a steady confidence built on months of proving herself in situations where others had written her off. She had studied relentlessly for these examinations, often staying awake long after lights out to review tactical manuals and military regulations by flashlight. The first examination covered military history and strategic thinking. As Maria worked through the questions, she drew upon not only her formal study, but also the practical lessons she had learned during training exercises. When asked about historical battles, she considered not just the official outcomes, but the human factors that had influenced the results, the morale of troops, the quality of leadership, the impact of logistics, and supply lines. During the lunch break between examinations, she overheard a conversation between 2 other candidates that made her stomach tighten with familiar anger. "Did you see Santos taking the test?" one of them said with obvious amusement. She was hunched over that paper like her life depended on it. Probably never seen questions that complicated before. His companion laughed. "Mitchell told me they only included her to meet some kind of diversity requirement. Nobody actually expects her to score well enough to advance." Maria forced herself to remain calm, channeling her anger into determination. She had heard similar comments throughout her life, and they had never proven accurate before. She returned to the afternoon examination with renewed focus, attacking each question with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. The physical fitness portion of the selection process took place the following day. While Maria knew she couldn't match the raw physical power of some candidates, she had trained consistently and understood that endurance and mental toughness often mattered more than pure strength. The course included obstacle navigation, combat simulation, and a grueling endurance test that eliminated nearly half the remaining candidates. Maria's performance was solid, if not spectacular, but what impressed the observers was her refusal to quit even when other, seemingly stronger candidates were dropping out. When Private Collins collapsed during the final endurance run, Maria stopped to help him reach the finish line, just as she had done during that early training march. Captain Williams made a note on his clipboard as he watched Maria support Collins across the finish line. "Interesting," he murmured to his assistant. Most candidates would have left him behind to preserve their own time. The psychological evaluation proved to be the most challenging component for many candidates. The military psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Harper, had a reputation for seeing through pretense and identifying the character flaws that would prevent someone from succeeding in leadership positions. Her interview with Maria lasted nearly 2 hours and covered everything from her childhood experiences to her long-term goals. "Tell me about a time when you failed at something important," Dr. Harper said, leaning back in her chair and studying Maria's reaction. Maria considered the question carefully before responding. "When I was 17, my younger brother was arrested for drug possession. I had been working 2 jobs to help support our family, and I thought I was doing everything right. But I missed the signs that he was struggling, and I failed him when he needed me most. How did that failure change you?" "It taught me that working hard isn't enough if you're not paying attention to the people around you. I learned to be more observant, more willing to ask difficult questions, and more committed to understanding the whole picture instead of just focusing on my own responsibilities." Dr. Harper made notes throughout the conversation, but her expression remained neutral. Maria left the interview uncertain about her performance, knowing only that she had answered every question honestly rather than trying to provide what she thought the evaluator wanted to hear. The waiting period for results stretched for 2 weeks, during which normal training continued, but everyone's attention was focused on the upcoming announcement. Maria threw herself into her regular duties with even more intensity than usual, finding that physical activity helped manage her anxiety about the selection results. During this period, she noticed a subtle shift in how others treated her. Word had spread about her performance during the selection process, and even soldiers who had previously dismissed her began showing a grudging respect. Sergeant Mitchell, in particular, seemed to be observing her more closely during training exercises. The announcement came during the morning formation on a cold Thursday in November. Captain Williams stood before the assembled unit with a single sheet of paper in his hand, the list of names that would determine the future trajectories of dozens of military careers. "The following soldiers have been selected for advanced leadership training," Williams announced. His voice carried clearly across the silent formation as he began reading names alphabetically. "Anderson James, Brooks Michael, Chun David, Martinez Carlos, Rodriguez Elena, Santos Maria." Maria felt her knees nearly buckle as she heard her own name. Around her, the reactions were mixed. Some soldiers applauded genuinely, others maintained stony silence, and a few exchanged glances of obvious surprise and disapproval. But none of that mattered in the moment of pure triumph that washed over her. After dismissal, Johnson was the first to reach her with congratulations. "I knew you'd make it," she said with a broad smile. "Now comes the hard part." Captain Williams approached Maria as the formation dispersed. "Congratulations, Santos. Your performance during the selection process was impressive, particularly your scores on the tactical analysis portions. You'll report to Fort Bragg next month to begin the program." "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I don't expect you will," Williams said. "But I should warn you that some people will be watching for you to fail. The program you're entering has never had someone with your background succeed in the top tier. Use that as motivation, not pressure." The weeks leading up to her departure for advanced training passed quickly. Maria found herself caught between excitement about the opportunity ahead and concern about leaving behind the familiar environment where she had finally found her footing. The advanced program would bring new challenges and knew people who would judge her based on their preconceptions rather than her proven performance. Sergeant Mitchell requested a private meeting with her during her final week at Fort Richardson. His office was small and spartanly decorated, with certificates and commendations covering one wall and tactical maps spread across his desk. "Sit down, Santos," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I want to talk to you before you leave for Bragg." Maria sat at attention, unsure what to expect from this conversation. "When you first arrived here, I didn't think you'd last a month," Mitchell said bluntly. "You were small, obviously inexperienced, and came from a background that doesn't usually produce successful soldiers. I was wrong about you." "Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me yet. I'm telling you this because the challenges you'll face at Bragg will make everything here look easy. The other soldiers in your program will be the best from bases all over the country. Many of them will have advantages you've never had: better education, family military traditions, natural physical gifts. Some of them will assume they deserve to be there more than you do." Mitchell leaned forward, his expression serious. "But I've watched you for months now, and I've seen something that can't be taught and can't be faked. You have the ability to see situations clearly, make good decisions under pressure, and inspire others to perform beyond their perceived limitations. Those are the qualities that make real leaders." He pulled a file folder from his desk drawer and handed it to her. "These are my formal evaluations of your performance here, along with letters of recommendation from Captain Williams and several other officers. They tell the story of a soldier who exceeded every expectation and earned her place through merit alone." Maria accepted the folder with hands that trembled slightly. "I don't know what to say, Sergeant." "Don't say anything. Just remember that you've earned your place at that table. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The night before her departure, Maria packed her belongings with the same methodical care she brought to everything else. Her possessions were few but meaningful: letters from her family, the tactical manual she had studied so intensively, and a small photo of her grandfather that had accompanied her through every challenge of the past year. Johnson sat on her own bunk, watching Maria prepare to leave. "You know, when I first got here, I thought the military was just another place where people like us would always be second-class citizens," Johnson said quietly. "You've shown me that's not necessarily true." "You would have figured that out yourself eventually," Maria replied. "You just needed to find your own path." "Maybe, but watching you fight for recognition without compromising who you were taught me something important about dignity and perseverance." The next morning, Maria stood outside the barracks with her duffel bag, waiting for the transport that would take her to the airport. Several soldiers had gathered to see her off, including some who had been among her harshest critics when she first arrived. Private Matthews, who had openly questioned her abilities just months earlier, approached her with an expression of grudging respect. "Santos, I owe you an apology. I judged you based on assumptions instead of giving you a chance to prove yourself. That was wrong. Apology accepted," Maria said simply. "Just remember that lesson when the next person arrives who doesn't fit your expectations." As the transport vehicle approached, Sergeant Mitchell appeared with a final piece of advice. "Santos, when you get to Bragg, they're going to test you in ways you haven't experienced yet. They'll try to break down everything you think you know about yourself and build it back up according to their standards. Stay true to who you are, but be open to growing beyond what you think your limits are." The ride to the airport gave Maria time to reflect on her journey from dismissed recruit to selected candidate for elite training. She thought about her family back home, who had sacrificed so much to give her this opportunity, and about the grandfather who had taught her that excellence was its own reward regardless of whether others recognized it. Fort Bragg represented a new chapter in her military career, one that would test not only her abilities, but also her character in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The program she was entering had a reputation for producing exceptional leaders, but also for destroying those who couldn't meet its demanding standards. As the airplane lifted off from the regional airport, Maria looked down at Fort Richardson shrinking below and made a silent promise to herself. She would not only survive the advanced training program, but she would excel in it. She would prove that leadership potential existed in places where others refused to look for it. And she would use her success to open doors for those who came after her. The flight to North Carolina took several hours, giving Maria time to study the materials she had been sent about the advanced program. The curriculum was intimidating in its scope and intensity. Advanced tactical studies, leadership psychology, strategic planning, and practical exercises that would test everything she had learned about herself as a soldier. Upon landing, Maria was met by a staff sergeant who would escort her to Fort Bragg. During the drive, he provided a briefing about what to expect during her first week in the program. The other candidates started arriving yesterday, he explained. You'll be the last to check in, which means you'll be playing catch-up from day one. The instructors don't make allowances for late arrivals, regardless of the reason. Maria nodded, accepting this information without complaint. She had learned to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, and starting from behind was not an unfamiliar position for her. Fort Bragg was larger and more imposing than any military installation she had previously seen. The scale of the operation, the obvious importance of the missions conducted there, and the caliber of personnel all reinforced the significance of the opportunity she had been given. The barracks for advanced training candidates were noticeably superior to her previous accommodations. Newer facilities, better amenities, and an atmosphere that suggested the residents were considered valuable assets rather than expendable recruits. As she entered the common area, conversation stopped, and several candidates looked her over with obvious curiosity. "You must be Santos," said a tall man with lieutenant's bars who appeared to be the senior candidate. "I am Lieutenant Patterson. We were beginning to wonder if you're going to show up." "Flight delays," Maria explained simply, noting the subtle challenge in his tone. "Well, you're here now. Orientation begins at 0500 tomorrow, and the instructors expect everyone to be fully prepared from the first session. I hope you're ready to hit the ground running." As Maria settled into her assigned quarters that evening, she could hear her fellow candidates in the common area discussing their backgrounds, their previous achievements, and their expectations for the program. The conversation made it clear that most of them came from military families, had attended prestigious universities, or had already distinguished themselves in combat situations. For a moment, the familiar feeling of being an outsider threatened to undermine her confidence. But then she remembered Sergeant Mitchell's words about earning her place, and she focused instead on preparing for the challenges ahead. She had come too far and overcome too much to let self-doubt derail her now. The advanced training program would test everything she thought she knew about leadership, strategy, and herself. But Maria Santos had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. Tomorrow would begin the next phase of her journey from discarded recruit to proven leader, and she intended to seize every opportunity to demonstrate that true potential could emerge from the most unexpected places. The advanced leadership program at Fort Bragg began before dawn with a formation that would have intimidated even seasoned soldiers. Maria stood alongside 23 other candidates, all of whom had been selected from hundreds of applicants across multiple military installations. The diversity of backgrounds was immediately apparent. Officers and enlisted personnel from different branches, veterans of multiple deployments, and graduates of military academies. Colonel Sarah Henderson, the program director, addressed the assembled candidates with the bearing of someone who had earned every ounce of respect she commanded. Her combat decorations were extensive, her reputation legendary, and her expectations clearly uncompromising. "You are here because someone believes you have the potential to become exceptional military leaders," Henderson began. "Over the next 6 months, we will test that belief in ways designed to reveal not just your current capabilities, but your capacity for growth under extreme pressure. Some of you will discover strengths you never knew you possessed. Others will confront limitations they never acknowledged." As Henderson outlined the program structure, Maria absorbed every detail while simultaneously observing her fellow candidates. Their body language, their reactions to specific challenges, and Their interactions with each other would provide valuable intelligence about the competition she faced. Lieutenant Patterson, whom she had met the previous evening, stood with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the best in any group. Beside him, Captain Jennifer Walsh carried herself with the quiet assurance of a combat veteran. Major Robert Chun displayed the analytical demeanor of someone who approached every situation as a problem to be solved through systematic thinking. The first week consisted of intensive assessments designed to establish baseline capabilities in leadership, tactical thinking, physical performance, and psychological resilience. Maria found herself consistently performing in the middle ranges of most evaluations. Not the top performer in any single category, but solid across all areas. During a tactical simulation exercise, she was assigned to lead a squad in an urban warfare scenario. Her team included Patterson, who made no effort to hide his skepticism about taking orders from someone he considered less qualified than himself. "Santos, I assume you have some kind of plan beyond hoping for the best," Patterson said as they studied the mission briefing. Maria ignored the condescension in his tone and focused on the tactical situation. The exercise called for securing a building while minimizing casualties and preserving strategic assets. Most candidates had approached similar scenarios with overwhelming force, but Maria noticed that previous successful teams had used more subtle approaches. "We're going to split into 3 elements," she explained, sketching out positions on her tactical map. "Patterson, you'll take 2 soldiers and create a visible approach from the east. That should draw their attention and most of their defensive fire. Walsh, you'll move around to the west and wait for my signal. I'll take the remaining soldiers through the underground approach that most teams have been ignoring." Patterson frowned at the plan. "That's awfully complicated. Wouldn't a direct assault be more reliable?" "Direct assaults are predictable," Maria replied. "The defenders are expecting that approach and have prepared accordingly. We need to do something they won't anticipate." The exercise unfolded exactly as Maria had predicted. Patterson's diversionary attack drew the defenders' attention, allowing her small team to infiltrate through the building's lower levels while Walsh's team prevented any escape routes. Within 30 minutes, they had secured all objectives with 0 simulated casualties. Colonel Henderson observed the debriefing with particular interest in Maria's tactical reasoning. "Explain your decision to reject the standard assault approach," she requested. "Ma'am, I studied the results of previous exercises and noticed that direct assault succeeded only when the attacking force had overwhelming numerical superiority. Since we were evenly matched, I looked for ways to create temporary advantages through deception and misdirection." "And how did you know the underground approach would be undefended?" "I didn't know for certain, ma'am, but I observed that most previous teams had focused exclusively on obvious approaches, which suggested that the defenders had concentrated their preparations accordingly. The underground route represented our best chance to achieve surprise." Henderson made notes in her evaluation folder. "Innovative thinking under pressure. Good use of available intelligence. Effective leadership of a diverse team with potentially conflicting personalities." After the debriefing, Patterson approached Maria with a noticeably different attitude. "That was solid tactical thinking back there," he admitted. "I expected a more conventional approach." "Conventional approaches work when you have conventional advantages," Maria replied. "When you don't, you have to find other ways to succeed." The academic portions of the program proved equally challenging, covering advanced topics in military history, strategic planning, international relations, and leadership psychology. Maria often found herself studying long after others had finished, not because the material was more difficult for her, but because she wanted to understand it more deeply than simply memorizing facts for examinations. During a seminar on historical military leadership, Dr. Patricia Morrison asked the candidates to analyze a complex battle scenario and identify the key leadership decisions that determined the outcome. Most candidates focused on the obvious tactical choices, but Maria's analysis went deeper. The critical leadership moment wasn't any single tactical decision, she argued during the class discussion. It was the commander's choice to promote a junior officer who understood the local terrain, despite opposition from his senior staff. That promotion decision changed the entire dynamic of how intelligence was gathered and utilized. Dr. Morrison leaned forward with interest. Elaborate on that analysis. The senior officers were making decisions based on theoretical knowledge of the terrain, but the junior officer had grown up in the area and understood details that wouldn't appear on any map. By elevating someone who brought different knowledge and perspective, the commander gained access to information that proved decisive. It was a leadership decision about who to trust and listen to, not just about tactics. The class discussion that followed revealed how different candidates approached the relationship between formal authority and practical knowledge. Some argued that experience and rank should always determine decision-making hierarchy, while others supported more flexible approaches based on situation-specific expertise. Captain Walsh approached Maria after class. That was an interesting perspective on the terrain issue. Most people miss that aspect entirely. I grew up in an area where local knowledge could mean the difference between life and death, Maria explained. You learn to value information that comes from experience, even when it contradicts official sources. Combat taught me the same lesson, Walsh said. The best intelligence often comes from people who others dismiss as unimportant. As the weeks progressed, Maria found herself gravitating toward candidates who shared similar values about leadership and teamwork. Walsh became a trusted study partner, while Major Chin appreciated Maria's systematic approach to complex problems. Even Patterson gradually developed respect for her abilities, though he sometimes struggled with the idea of learning from someone he had initially underestimated. The midpoint evaluation arrived in the form of a comprehensive leadership exercise that would test everything they had learned during the first 3 months. Each candidate would be assigned to lead a mixed team of actual soldiers in a complex mission scenario that combined tactical, logistical, and diplomatic elements. Maria was given command of a 12-soldier team tasked with establishing a forward operating base in hostile territory while negotiating with local civilian leaders and managing limited supply lines. The exercise would last 72 hours and would be observed by senior officers evaluating each candidate's leadership potential. Her assigned team included a mix of experienced NCOs and younger soldiers, several of whom had reputations as difficult to manage. Sergeant First Class Williams, a 20-year veteran, made his skepticism clear during their initial briefing. "No offense, Santos, but I've been doing this since before you joined the military. Are you sure you're ready to be giving orders to people like me?" Maria recognized the challenge in his question, but also understood that earning his respect would be crucial to the mission's success. "Sergeant Williams, you're absolutely right that you have experience I don't have. I'm counting on that experience to help make this mission successful. I'm not here to prove I know more than you do. I'm here to coordinate all our different strengths toward completing the objective." Williams studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. What do you need from us?" Over the next 72 hours, Maria demonstrated the leadership skills she had been developing throughout the program. She delegated responsibilities based on individual strengths, made decisive choices when consensus wasn't possible, and adapted plans when circumstances changed. When supply delays threatened to compromise the mission timeline, she worked with Sergeant Williams to identify alternative resource sources. When negotiations with local leaders reached an impasse, she found creative solutions that addressed everyone's concerns. The most challenging moment came during the second night, when a simulated enemy attack tested their defensive preparations. Maria found herself coordinating a response that required split-second decisions about troop positioning, resource allocation, and tactical priorities. The exercise evaluators pushed every element of the scenario to maximum difficulty, looking for signs that the stress would overwhelm her decision-making abilities. Instead, Maria seemed to become calmer and more focused as the pressure increased. She maintained clear communication with all team elements, made adjustments based on changing battlefield conditions, and ensured that every soldier understood both their individual responsibilities and the overall mission objectives. When the exercise concluded, Sergeant Williams approached her with obvious respect in his demeanor. "Santos, that was some of the best leadership I've seen from any officer, let alone someone at your experience level. You kept us focused, made good decisions under fire, and treated everyone like their contributions mattered." The formal evaluation session with Colonel Henderson took place a week later. Maria entered Henderson's office uncertain about her performance, knowing only that she had given everything she had to the leadership exercise. "Sit down, Santos," Henderson said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I want to discuss your evaluation results." Maria sat at attention, trying to read Henderson's expression for clues about what would follow. "Your performance during the leadership exercise was exceptional," Henderson began. "The team you led accomplished their objectives more efficiently than any other group, and they did so while maintaining higher morale and cohesion than we typically see in these scenarios." "Thank you, ma'am. More importantly, your approach to leadership demonstrated qualities that can't be taught through conventional training. You showed the ability to earn respect from experienced personnel, make complex decisions under pressure, and adapt your style to different situations and personalities." Henderson opened a file folder and reviewed several pages of evaluation notes. Sergeant Williams specifically commented that you treated him as a valuable advisor rather than a potential threat to your authority. That shows a maturity and confidence that many officers never develop. "I learned early that good information can come from unexpected sources," Maria said. Sergeant Williams had knowledge and experience that could help the mission succeed. It would have been foolish to ignore that resource. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that distinguishes exceptional leaders from merely competent ones," Henderson replied. "Which brings me to why I asked you here today." Maria felt her pulse quicken as Henderson's tone shifted to something more formal and significant. "The program you're participating in serves two purposes. The primary purpose is to provide advanced training to promising military personnel. But we also use it to identify individuals who should be fast-tracked for positions of greater responsibility." Henderson stood and walked to the window overlooking the training facilities. "Santos, your background is not typical for the candidates we usually identify for accelerated advancement. You don't have family military connections, you didn't attend prestigious universities, and you started your career without many of the advantages that most successful officers take for granted." "That's correct, ma'am. What you do have is something much rarer and more valuable. You have the ability to see situations clearly, make sound judgments under pressure, and inspire others to perform beyond their perceived capabilities. Those qualities, combined with your work ethic and integrity, make you exactly the kind of leader the military needs more of." Henderson turned back to face Maria directly. "I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to sergeant and assignment to a specialized unit that works on sensitive operations requiring exceptional leadership skills. The assignment would begin immediately after you complete this program." Maria felt the room spinning slightly as the magnitude of what Henderson was offering sank in. The promotion and assignment represented more advancement than she had dared to hope for, even in her most optimistic moments. "Ma'am, I'm honored by your confidence in me, but I have to ask why you're willing to take this chance on someone with my limited experience." Henderson smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "Because I've learned to recognize potential when I see it, regardless of where it comes from. The military's future depends on identifying and developing leaders who can succeed in complex, unpredictable environments. You've proven that you could do exactly that." The remaining weeks of the program passed in a blur of intensive preparation for Maria's new assignment. Her fellow candidates reacted to news of her promotion and selection with a mixture of congratulations, surprise, and, in a few cases, obvious resentment. But the opinions that mattered most, those of Henderson, the other instructors, and the soldiers she had led during exercises, were uniformly positive. On graduation day, Maria's family traveled from Texas to attend the ceremony. Seeing her parents in the audience, proudly watching their daughter receive recognition for achievements they had only dreamed possible, provided validation for every sacrifice and challenge she had endured. Colonel Henderson presented Maria with her sergeant's stripes in front of the assembled candidates and their families. Sergeant Santos represents the best of what this program attempts to achieve, Henderson announced. She has demonstrated that leadership excellence can emerge from any background when it's combined with determination, integrity, and a commitment to continuous growth. As Maria accepted her new rank insignia, she thought about Sergeant Mitchell back at Fort Richardson, who had been the first to see her potential when others saw only limitations. She thought about Johnson, who had shown her that perseverance could overcome prejudice, and about all the people who had believed in her when she barely believed in herself. But mostly, she thought about the soldiers she would soon be leading in her new assignment, and her responsibility to provide them with the same kind of leadership that had helped her grow from a dismissed recruit into a proven soldier. The journey from being discarded without a thought to earning recognition as an exceptional leader had taught her that potential existed in places where others refused to look for it. The ceremony concluded with individual meetings between graduates and their new commanding officers. Maria was introduced to Major Patricia Chun, who would oversee her first assignment as a newly promoted sergeant leading a specialized reconnaissance unit. Sergeant Santos, Major Chun said as they shook hands, "I've read Colonel Henderson's evaluation of your performance, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you can accomplish with a permanent command. Your unit has some challenges that I think will be well suited to your particular leadership style." "What kind of challenges, ma'am?" "The soldiers in your unit are all highly skilled, but they come from diverse backgrounds and haven't always worked well together in the past. Previous leaders have tried to impose conformity through discipline, but that approach hasn't been effective. I think your ability to coordinate different strengths toward common objectives might be exactly what they need." As Maria prepared to leave Fort Bragg for her new assignment, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since that first dismissive encounter with Corporal Jenkins at Fort Richardson. The girl who had been written off as a charity case was now being entrusted with leading some of the military's most specialized personnel. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't happened without significant personal cost. But every challenge had taught her something valuable about leadership, about perseverance, and about the importance of never accepting others' limitations as the final word on her potential. Standing outside the Fort Bragg headquarters building with her orders in hand, Maria Santos smiled as she thought about the soldiers who were waiting for a leader who would see their individual strengths and help them achieve more than they thought possible. She had learned from the best teachers, those who had believed in her, and those who had doubted her, and now it was time to pass those lessons forward. The discarded recruit had become the leader she had always had the potential to be, and her story was just beginning.